Keeping rules out of the way. If you'd like to ask a question throughout, please make sure you use the raise hand tool that's located at the top of the Teams bar. Alternatively, please feel free to use the chat function if you would like to write a question in there. We will pause for questions at the end of each segment, but we will also have a question and answer section at the end for any other questions. Also, if everyone could just remain on mute throughout, unless you're asking a question, that would be greatly appreciated. All right, let's get into it. So our panel today is made up of our Queensland and South Australia delivery team. I'm Brianna Hughes, and you'll be joined today by my team of all-stars, Kurt, Zhuzha, AE, Felipe, and Steve. Alrighty, today we'll be running through the following agenda. So we'll start with a bit of a brief overview around what is PPM governance. Zhuzha will then take us through a bit of background and history around the workflows and the rapid improvement that we've seen over the last 4 years. Felipe and Steve will then zoom in on business process flows, providing an overview and the purpose that they can serve in your business. AE will then run you through a common governance request we see from many of our clients, and we'll show how you can receive this in system with a business process flow. Kurt will then be exploring some of the other possibilities there is around automating governance and PPM and the basics that you need to know in order to do this. We'll then wrap with the session around a Q&A, and we'll be sure to answer as many questions as we can as time permits. Alrighty, so what is PPM governance? PPM governance is the framework, functions, and processes that guide activities and project, portfolio, and program management. It provides guidance, decision-making, and oversight. Technology solutions such as the Power Platform, alongside our Sensei IQ PPM solution, enable us to automate many functions and processes such as risks, issues, change requests, resourcing requests, just to name a few. I'll now pass on to Zhuzha, who will provide a bit of background around the history around Microsoft workflows.
Thank you, Brie. So the road so far, if you guys remember back to the old days, when we were talking about workflows, and by workflows, I mean anything to do with project lifecycle workflows, you know, when you're sending through your project to move from one phase to another, anything that requires maybe financial approvals like financial, budgets and change requests. Those were all kind of workflow related topics that we talked about in the past. And in terms of what Microsoft provided back in the days, we really just had that one tool, which is called SharePoint Designer, to use. To the right of the screen, you can see a screenshot of what SharePoint Designer looks like. So as we all know, it's a really old technology. It was, based on SharePoint, and it is the last version or latest version that's available still, and some of you might still be using SharePoint Designer. It's a 2013 version, so it's pretty old. And then Microsoft has been making some changes and updates to some of the SharePoint tools since then, but because SharePoint Designer is now discontinued and the support has stopped on it, they haven't really made any changes or updates to it for about 5 years. So it's a really old technology. And then, as we all know, Microsoft launched in 2016 something called Flow, but we will move on to that platform and where it is now in a bit. So in terms of what SharePoint Designer, what are the pluses and minuses? What I'd like to point out is, as you can see on the screen, it's not the easiest tool to kind of understand and build. You remember that we always relied on IT. So if you are in the PMO, you always needed IT support or IT technical skills and specialist skills to build a SharePoint Designer workflow and then maintain it as well. So if you needed to make a change to your workflow, you either had to contact us or have IT look at it. And because it needs special skills to work with SharePoint Designer, you need code. So when you look through the SharePoint Designer workflows, it's full of code, and it's something that is not really easy to understand for someone who doesn't have technical background. So a few limitations in terms of functionality, and yeah, we didn't see that no code, low code technology that we now have seen and heard a lot of. So what Microsoft did, and also in terms of possibilities and what you can do with SharePoint Designer, a lot of times, a lot of our clients asked us questions about, can we do this? Can we do that with the workflows? And so many times I remember that the answer was no. And now what I see happening is that the answer is always yes, because there's always a possibility to create different or to meet different requirements with Microsoft new technology, which is all about the Power Platform. So Microsoft launched the Power Platform. I guess if we are just really focusing on the workflows, SharePoint Designer got replaced by something called Flow, Microsoft Flow, which then changed its name to Power Automate. So that's one of the Power Platform kind of components. But you can see that there's Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate, and virtual agents as well, all part of the Power Platform. And this is what we now hear a lot about. And it's all about low code, no code solution. And what that means, especially for the PMOs, is you can now go into the Power Platform and start writing your own code. Well, when we say code, it's basically low code or no code solution. You can basically create a business process flow or workflow from scratch without having to have specialist IT skills. And this really kind of breaks the reliance on IT for especially the PMO. And also in the future, if you need to maintain your workflows and you need to make changes to it, it becomes so much easier. So I guess the response time from the PMO to the business users is now a lot shorter, and also the reliance on IT and even on companies like ours is much less, which means you can utilize your time to probably do something more efficient and use your time to do something other than coding solutions. So that's a huge benefit of the Power Platform. And like I said, Power Automate is one of the components. Power Automate combined with Power Apps, it really can do magical stuff. And that's what our experts are going to point out for you and show you in the next few minutes. So now I'm going to hand it over to Felipe, who is going to tell us a little bit more about what a business process flow is.
Cool. So before we go deep into the details of things, so what is a business process flow and why to use business process flow? So basically a business process flow, it's the representation of the process flow from a business. So it's the sequence, the stages of the process and the steps that are necessary to complete each of those stages. And within these steps, you can have the actions, resources, deadlines, outcomes, everything that you need to say, okay, this stage is complete. Let's go to the next stage until you finalize the whole process. These business process flows can be linear or parallel. Linear would be a process flow that starts and finishes very nice and neat. And a parallel is when you have business process flows triggering other business process flows, or you have parallel stages or steps happening at the same time, which can also, it's very common as well. Even more with time, things are getting more complex. So you start getting more parallel rather than linear process flows. Next one. So the advantages of having a business process flow, first one is the standardizing your process, and the clarity. So everyone knows what is the process, what is compound that process of, and how that needs to be done. So everyone has a very clear understanding of the whole process and all these steps that are necessary to complete the process. You can also have the agility, and you can see much easier where are all your bottlenecks. You can act where are your bottlenecks to fix it. And the efficiency comes together because the same way you assign the resource better, you can see where are the costly steps, the costly stages of your process, and find ways to get that improved, which brings us to the continuous improvement. So having a process flow is a great tool for using the continuous improvement and also always getting better agility, better efficiency on your process. So on the Microsoft world, what we have out of the box is this page where we have here on top on the orange part, we have the stages of the process. So you can see very clearly with the visual indicator that the planning has been done and we are now on the execution stage. under the execution stage, we can see all the steps in that active stage. You can see that issues resolved has a little red star. That means that these are required steps. So just once all the required steps are completed, you can proceed to the next stage. That also brings us to a lot of task automation opportunities where you can have the notifications and approval processes being automated and gaining more time for you to focus on more interesting activities. The required steps are also very much customizable. So depending on what the actions you have completed, you can change the stages or the steps inside the stages. So it's a lot of flexibility over there. And you have a very good data integration, so you can keep using the data that you were using already. So with the Project Online or other tools that you already have on your company. Steve will get a bit more in details on that. Steve?
Thanks, Felipe. So let's look a little bit further into business process flows, the purpose they can serve. So how can these be applied in the real world? Like we've seen, the theory around it. What are some real use cases for business process flows or BPFs? So they can potentially improve and automate governance for projects, as we're all aware, this is why you're here today, as well as related other use cases such as resource management. So as part of a project, as we know in projects, they scale up, they scale down, so they can help in the onboarding and offboarding of resources there. Felipe's previous slide covered an out-of-the-box business process for a business process flow for a major project. But where can we go from here? Like, wouldn't it be great to have a checklist at each stage for all the relevant steps for the processes, say, in your team? So now taking a focus onto projects. This image shows the steps for each project stage gate. For example, say initiation through to closure. Then the second image, which has just come up, shows how the steps for the stage can be addressed for items that are all mandatory in this case, where you see the red stars, or optional where they don't appear. Business process flows can progressively get more complex to accommodate business requirements, subject to technical limitations, of course. Such as additional financial approvals for selected stages. So on screen, you can see for a financial limit has been set, and that can set that can trigger a certain number of approval or approvals, and even conditions based on different criteria as well. So let's look at how approvals work together with business process flows. So this first image shows the step-by-step approach, which anyone can take for defining each stage in a business process flow. Then the second image shows an action step within that first image that ties with extra workflow functionality outside of the business process flow, which you can see with that large project launch approval there under execute process. Then the third image shows how business process flows and Power Automate flows can work together for a subsequent financial approval, say after an initial PMO approval. Business process flows can also tie related tables or otherwise known as entities together. So you may recall earlier on the PPM Governance slide, the diagram that suggested some of these elements, such as risks and issues, and my colleague A will explore this further in detail soon, as well as other things such as deliverables or benefits, for example. So to summarize, there is substantial flexibility and compatibility with business process flows and Power Automate. And further customizations are available, such as preventing a user going back to previous stages, for example. We'll just pause there. Are there any questions at this stage before we move on to the next section? Simon, I see you have your hand up.
Thanks, Steve. This might not be the right time to ask the question, but I'm really keen to get some feedback on two things that ultimately relate to maintainability of ongoing flows. In the past, Microsoft platforms have been really difficult to either build these flows or change and adjust going forwards. And I know in some of our past conversations, there's low code, no code sort of conversations that mean you can just take care of this yourself. There's always a but that says don't go too far or think about, you know, what might happen later on to change or adjust, or someone else come in and look at it. So I'm keen to make sure that at the right time you guys think about this, you tell us who's actually doing this. You know, the things on your screen, is that Sensei doing it? Can we do it ourselves? And if we're doing it ourselves, what are some of the things that you guys would suggest we consider when building these flows, because we don't want to create a problem in the future?
Thank you, Simon. That's a great question. It's actually one of our pre-submitted questions. So we will address that at the end. I'll make a note to expand on the maintainability part of it as well. And before I hand off to AE, any further questions? With that, it's over to you, AE. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. For our pre-built flow demo, we've decided to undertake a common business issue, and that's how do we handle risks within a project, and how do we escalate these risks into an issue. So I started off with a scenario. Our client has implemented Sensei IQ and requires a solution that allows a risk to be raised and assessed by stakeholders and escalated to an issue if business conditions are met. So our general requirements we've been asked to meet: a risk must be assessed by your manager and reassessed by a PMO. The process must be easy for all to understand and allow stakeholders to engage within the Power App and daily use Microsoft tools. So for this instance, we'll be using Teams to complete our approvals, and also Office 365 emails to view those as well. So giving us 2 avenues for people to interact with any approvals they need. The business rules for defining a risk must be followed at each step. The process must be automatic and notifications must be sent to relevant stakeholders. If a risk is reassessed by the PMO and has a risk score over 15, an issue is created with an attached process. So in terms of these requirements in this scenario, what are the tools that we need to build this process? So we're going to be using the Power Platform to create our business rules, to create the fields that we need, put in the logic that we need. Do we need to attach documents? Do we need the ability to pull that into Power BI for reporting? All of those things. And we're going to be using Power Automate to send these approval notifications automatically, allowing us to stay within the tool that everyone is used to, and allowing us to automate these processes so that we can mitigate delays and other issues that occur. Thank you. Okay, so I'll start sharing the screen. Okay, so here we have just our risk entities. So here I'm just showing off sort of the extra fields that I've added in. So we've added in a PMO approver, and that's just a lookup table for our user. So it's defining that the PMO approver has to be someone within the tool. Additionally, we've got our inherent consequence and likelihood, an escalate to an issue toggle that is a balloon field of yes or no, and a few other areas where we can attach a risk mitigation plan if required. Similarly, with the issues, we've done something similar. We've added a few areas where we're able to link a risk to an issue, have a resolution plan, has it been completed, yes or no, has it been implemented, and is the issue mitigated. Furthermore, here we're looking at our business rule. So we have a business rule here. It's as simple as setting up what entity you're in, what the display name you want to have for this business rule, what field. So here we've just selected the risk score, and is it greater than or equal to the value of 15. So our risks are categorized by likelihood and consequence with a linear scale. So a least likely rating will give us a 1. The highest likely rating gives us a 5, and then we're just timesing that out in a simple risk matrix square. In terms of the flow that we've built, so this is a flow that can be executed. So we're using a simple when a flow is executed step. We're grabbing the record ID. We're updating our process stage, because once you click it, it'll say it's been sent. Now we want to let the users know that their approval is in process. People are looking at it. It's being reviewed. Subsequently, if it fails, we'll be able to show that it fails. If it's been rejected, we also can show that outcome as well. So we're grabbing the risk. We're finding the project it's linked to. we're setting the base URLs and things like that for the project URL, the record URL, because we want to make it as easy as possible. When we access the email, we get the review, we're able to link ourselves straight to where the information is and allow us to make our decisions based on the current information. So we're not looking for old reports down the line. We're not moving to Power BI. We're right in the tool. The live information is there. We can update information where required, and we can make those checks and make sure that our business processes are followed. After that, we are notifying the reviewer. So these reviews are made in Markdown. So we've got just a few details I've put in. I've just put in some very base level details of what the risk is, name, when is it due, what's the description, a few links to the risk link and the project link, and then asking the certain people to action the issue. In terms of the actual business process, in terms of the question about how easy it is to make, you create a business process, add an entity you want it to link to, and then you just add the data steps in. So the name, who is it assigned to, the category, the inherent consequence, likelihood, and we move through the stages. So we build out every stage, everything that we need, and here we've got a flow step. So this is where the user, after completing the data steps, can send this flow out for approval, and then we can action these. And then here is just some simple logic about our risk score. So if it's greater than 16 or equal to, we're escalating it to an issue, or we're closing the risk. So now I'll actually demonstrate what it looks like in the front end. So we have this risk here. I've made a resource availability risk, just with some information that a PM would likely put in, just a bit of a description of what's going on, what the category is, the contingency plan, the triggers, the mitigation plan, and what kind of cost it may have to the business. So in our first gate, we have the risk name has been filled out. We haven't filled out the category. We haven't filled out the likelihood or consequence. So when we try to go to the next stage, we get an error. So we're able to enforce those rules that if we don't have these things filled out, what are we assessing? Not enough information has been provided. And as you can see here, we're able to see how long has this been in this stage. If we have a risk that is in PMO risk review and it hasn't been actioned for 40 days, it's a way for us to make sure that internal processes are being kept in line. We're actioning things timely. And in terms of our flows, we're able to govern this process to send out notifications when a risk is late or it's overdue, based on some of the fields that we select here. So I'm going to say that I have a resourcing problem. It's a moderate issue at the moment. I think it's quite possibly completed that. I'm able to move to the next stage. So we saved all of our information there, and then we move on to our risk review. So in our risk review, we need to set a due date. Obviously, we need to know if this risk is happening right now, is it going to be in a few months? That will inform how the severity of the issue, how quickly we need to act, who needs to be notified, and if there are any more business rules that need to happen. If a risk is immediate and we have to stop work today, we may decide that, hey, anything that is going to be a problem within the next 14 days might have a high likelihood, an extreme severity rating. So we're going to put that as a 19, and then I need to pick who's going to get the approval. So we've reviewed the risk. The PM is happy. They put in their information. We need to know who the PMO approval will be. So I'm just going to put in our service account details. Click save. We'll see here that we are required to attach a risk mitigation plan. So we'll be able to attach that, grab a file, and it'll be uploaded and saved within the BPF. So when the PMO is ready to have a look at the risk mitigation plan, obviously here we have a summary, but there may be documentation required for records depending on the requirements of the tenants or anything else we need. In terms of running the flow, it's a simple run a flow button. It'll ask you to log in to authenticate, and then you run the flow. So in terms of running the flow, so to make it as easy as possible, Microsoft has the ability you'll get an approval notification in your email, but you'll also be able to look at it in Teams. So depending on what the internal processes are, we may need to use either an internal issue, and as the ding just went off on my computer, you can see that I've now been given an approval center notification. So we've got some of the information. It's due by Thursday, 19th of May. We can change for the specific user's time zone if required. Right now, I've just kept it at GMT. We just have the risk description, and then we've got them sort of the tasks they need to complete. And when we click the links, we're able to link right back to the risk. So I guess we won't have any issues of, I don't know where to go. What do I do? How do I action this? Where is the information kept? We're always linking back to there. And then if we see here, if Teams is your preferred method of communication with many businesses, we have information here. So we're able to look through all of these things. So say I submit and I say I've approved this, I'm happy with all of the information I've seen within the risk. If we wait 2 or 3 seconds just for the flow to complete. So we can see here it's still in the processing phase. So we don't have the tick. We're not allowed to continue just yet. And then as we can see, now I've set myself as the PMO, and now you'll see that the PMO now has a review. So the review has been completed by the PM. They're happy to move it across. And now we've got sort of just the same sort of details we had before, but now we're reviewing the risk mitigation plan. We're asked to provide a risk and likelihood consequence assessment within the record, and then we're able to progress the risk to the next appropriate stage. And here we still have the links. So now should have. I need to refresh Teams. And as we can see here, I've got all of the notifications coming up. Just got to make sure I'm in the right environment. And then here we have the PMO review risk. So it comes up in the similar format. You're able to put all your comments. If you need more actions, do you want to cancel the request, follow it up? Do you want to reassign it to another user? You have that option as well. Maybe you've moved departments and you're getting requests from a foreign department that you're not working in anymore. So let's say I approve it. So we have the ability to approve it through our emails or through Teams. Sensei IQ we do have customizations where we can actually embed all of the approval history within a given entity, and you'll be able to have a look at all the approvals over projects, risks, issues, change requests, variations, whatever they may be. And if we do a quick refresh here, we'll see, I didn't say before when I added the. One of the most important things, I guess, within the BPF is that these are fields within the Dataverse, so you do need to save these before navigating away, or else your information will be wiped as it's unsaved. And as you can see here, we've succeeded. Our run flow was successful, and we're able to move to the next stage. So in terms of the PMOs, the PMO would come in here and say, okay, I think this is a major issue. It's almost certainly going to happen. I click save, and because we've set up our business rules, our risk score is now 20. So it's above that 15 threshold. And now, as you can see here, we have the ability to escalate to an issue. So we say, okay, this is being selected to yes automatically because of our business rules, and then we hit the next stage. If we have not created an issue already where we want to link it to, we'll be able to create it. So we've got our resource availability issue here, and now we can see the progress from a risk into an issue. We're able to action this information. If we need to assign it to a new person as an issue, we've got the status here. Is it postponed? Is it closed? We've got the same categories to put it under. What's the priority? And if we had more requirements in terms of what we want to do with the priority, it might be that if it's a high priority, it needs to go to a certain person. It may be a certain level of users. We may have some more approvals that need to happen because of any logic. And similar to what we did with risks, we have the options of doing that. So in terms of the risk identification, we need someone to assign it to. So I'll just assign it to myself again and say, okay, this is still a resourcing issue. And then as we see here, we've got priority. We need to set the priority. We've already set that in the BPF. So anything that you set in here will also be reflected in the BPF. They're the same fields. We just make sure that the mandatory fields that we need to make sure that we're following the business process need to be in here. In terms of the impact, we're thinking it's going to be a schedule impact. So we're going to say it's a high impact to schedule. 8 days, say it's 40 days. And then we're going to complete the resolution plan. And then when we click next, we're able to move across. And then in the outcome, once everything has been actioned, the PMO can come in here and say, yep, I'm happy to say this issue has been resolved. We've had our 40 days where we thought we we're going to have an issue. We've mitigated it with our plan. We've added the resolution, and now we're finished. So you'll be able to see that we're finished. And all of the stages will be ticked correctly, and the outcome will be a green finished tick. This also allows us to move back, so we can look back and say, okay, so what did we do? Okay, we still have the risk mitigation plan. It's still there. We know exactly who the PMO that identified the risk in the first place. Any of the information, we said, oh, it'll be a $50,000 cost. What is the cost? What did the issue ended up resolving in terms of the cost? Were we high? Were we low? Any other information that we need. At this step here, if we had a low consequence, so if we had a negligible consequence and a rare likelihood, you'll see we can't change anything because we've already finished the BPF. So this logic won't come back and delete these stages. It'll stay there, and that's sort of a few of the things you can do with a BPF in terms of linking it to other entities, escalating things. Within our business, we're regularly configuring BPFs like this that start a risk, raise it into an issue. It might be a change request that becomes a variation, a proposal that becomes a project, or an idea that becomes a proposal that also then becomes a project, for instance. Some of the limitations that you may have here. So in terms of the stages, you can only have up to 30 stages within one BPF. And also you can only have up to 10 different types of BPFs per entity. So if we had a risk BPF that was changing based on the type, and it may be the whole process changes, who reviews it, what fields we want to use, we can only have up to 10 of those per entity. And my colleague Kurt will be going over what other things we may need to consider. How do we get to this point where we've got a nice clean process, and all of the other things such as reporting that we can add into it so that you can have insights over where all your projects are, where your risks are, where your change requests are, and who's actioning what.
Perfect. Thanks, AE. Hey, that was excellent. Thank you. You're a hard act to follow. I should have gone before you, not after you in hindsight. Thanks for taking over. So I thought what we'd do now that our heads are in the cloud with all the opportunities and the technology and all these cool things we can do, just take a bit of a step back and just how do we get to that point of being able to build one of these process flows and automation? So the first thing I'll cover is just around the licensing component. So obviously there's always a cost with everything. So on top of your Sensei IQ subscription, there's a few things we need here. So specifically on what you've seen today so far, we do need a Power Apps per user or per app plan. And what that does is give you access to Sensei IQ, as AE just showed the interface for, as well as being able to build these Power Automate flows, which are actually doing all the approvals and components there. The good thing is that if you're an approver in email and everything, generally your Microsoft 365 licensing will cover that component. So you don't need to have a specific license unless you're going into IQ itself. The other component here that we haven't really talked about, but is the actual output of all this, is the Power BI component that we use as our business insights tool. So effectively, we deliver all of these insights, all of this information via Power BI. So you just need to have a Power BI Pro license per user or a Power BI Premium capacity per workspace. So we'll go past that. This is the unfun bit. So now we'll just go through to the next part, which is we're going to essentially talk about building the governance user stories. So effectively, what this is sort of taking that step back and going, before I know what I'm building, I need to understand what it is I want to build. So just kind of thinking in the instance of I'm this particular user, and these are sort of some examples of how you do that. So starting from the left, so as a project manager,
I want to be able to submit stage gates for approval in my project. So effectively having the checklist, having that predefined, I want to then be able to hit a button and then have it either approved by a person, a group, or a selected role. So if we go on to the next one, which is executive leadership. So they want to be able to approve new project ideas. They want to approve potentially change requests. They want to approve proposals. So have that final say on whether something is initiated into a project and then delivered in our budget and or sort of availability stream. The next component we look at is the portfolio manager. So tied into what the project manager sort of user story is there about submitting the stage gate for approval. As a portfolio manager, I may be the person that is actually approving that project moving between phases or stages. So being able to have enough information in an email to be able to make that decision is always good. And then also, being able to click back into the system as a portfolio manager to actually review if that project, depending on when it's moving, is actually impacting my entire portfolio or it's all good. We can kind of go on that. Another example is, as a team member working on a project, I want to be able to submit a timesheet for approval. So this is one of the new features that's just come out in Sensei IQ recently. So we have the task scheduling tool. Within that, you basically assign your resources to those tasks. And then based on those resource allocations, they'll then have the ability to actually submit a timesheet against those tasks, which are then approved by a resource manager. The final one there is sort of tying more into that overarching sort of reporting and insights component, where you're actually in the PMO or admin role. And essentially you want to be able to review the governance activities. You want to be able to sort of see things proactively and then be able to action on those insights if we're displaying those correctly to you. Thank you. So if we think about designing the process, so before we get to all the cool stuff, that's the how. That's when you kind of probably want to talk to us or take some information from this particular session and go forth and build and prosper. We got to go through and actually we got to think about the what and we got to think about the why are we doing this. So when we think about the what we want to do is basically define the business process. So what we want to actually do is understand what are the inputs and conditions for this actual process that we're designing. What's the success criteria? What's the failure criteria? So often the success criteria is either something moves to the next stage or something is approved like a change request and that goes into the budget in financials, for example. But what we actually want to really consider is what is the failure criteria? What happens if it's rejected? Does it go back to the previous approver if there is one? Does it go back a stage in the workflow? Does it go through to the person that submitted for approval and just give them the feedback in the comments and then they can resubmit? So we need to really think about how this process is going to work, both from a moving forward and what if it's stalled at any particular stage through there. We also want to think about, is there any approvals required? So, is it, in AE's example, his approval was an individual that we're picking from the Sensei IQ user group. Is it actually going to be a group that we want to actually apply that to? Does everyone in the group need to approve it, or is it individuals? Is there one approval? Is there more than one? So, we get into that linear versus parallel approval. So if we can actually send out multiple approvals in one go, we can still just wait for all of them to come in, but we're not relying on one in the other, therefore saving time and being more efficient. Is there any time-sensitive component to approvals? If it's not approved within 24 hours, do we need to do something? Is that something that needs to be escalated? Is that something that should be delegated? Is that something where we just need to constantly send the reminders to say, hey, you haven't approved this, you need to do it? So, all of these things we need to factor into the what are we trying to do? If we then move along into the why, we need to think about what are we wanting to achieve from this process. Are we looking for control? Are we looking for accountability on people actually approving things so that we can say, hey, on this date it was approved and that was the fact at that point in time? Are we just looking for visibility across the board of what's happening within our portfolio? We need to consider these. And then the last component there I've got there is the insights sitting at the bottom of why there. So how do we actually want to report this back to the people that can actually use this information and make decisions or be able to understand what's going on across the board for themselves? Once we've got those actually documented, we can then move into the how. So that's where we'd probably come in and you'll probably want to ask, here's everything I want to do. What's the best technology to do that? And it's exactly like we talked about earlier is we want to make sure that if it's low code or no code, that it's either manageable by yourselves or easily understood. So, the other things we need to consider as well with the how is we need to consider licensing implications. So Power Automate Flow is a perfect example. when you're actually building flows under a license, you have an action limit per day. And once you hit that action limit, I think it's at 6,000 at the moment. It hasn't changed since last I checked. It basically throttles your Power Automate flow running. So something that would normally take 30 seconds, for example, could take hours because you basically lose all your resources because you've hit your action count. There is ways you can get around that. So there is Power Automate per flow licensing that changes it from 6,000 to 250,000 actions a day and gives you a higher pool of resources to actually do that. You go into the higher frequency. But it's things to consider when we think about it. So if it's a very simple flow with few steps, not a big deal. If it's very complicated with parallel branching and everything like that, it's going to take more effort and more time and more consumption of that daily limit. We also need to think about, I kind of alluded to it in the insights, is how is this information going to be consumed by the different users of the system? So are they going to see it in-app? So a project manager, for example, they're going to be managing their project. They're going to be doing the checklist, whether it's mandatory or not mandatory. They're going to submit it for approval. And then their expectation is either everything's approved and I can move it to the next stage, or that happens automatically and I get notification of that. We need to think about people like the portfolio managers. They might not necessarily want to go into an individual project. I know I wouldn't. They want to basically have this presented to them in a report. So effectively, that's where we look to use that other Power Platform component of Power BI to deliver those insights, make it drillable, and then we actually get that full benefit out of that. So that's good. We'll keep going. Thank you. So just to give you sort of a couple of ideas on how this goes. So I know you've seen this a bit already, but this is around sort of proposal approval in Sensei IQ. So if we think about this initiation gate here, we've effectively got a bunch of fields here, and then there would have been some logic behind there that would have allowed us to actually build this into a business process flow and to build the flow. So if we look at this, we've got our business case completed. If you look at that, it's a yes/no field effectively where the text is complete or incomplete. We've made that mandatory. You can see the little red asterisks there. Again, project manager, you need to pick a project manager. It's a people picker. It's got to be someone in IQ. They've got to be licensed. They've got to be available to be selected. Again, it's mandatory at this particular stage. And then we look at departmental approval, incomplete at the moment. That's probably going to be a field that's going to be automatically populated once we've actually gone through the approval process, which could be a multiple step process, but that could be related to one particular step. And then we look at the submit for approval. That's a flow. And then are we using the sponsor as the approval, which can be selected against the project? Again, is this an approval group? We just need to consider that. We'll keep moving. Thank you, Bree. So just around a typical project lifecycle. So just kind of breaking it into 4 phases. So we've got our propose, plan, execute, and close phases. And then at each gate, there's effectively an approval in there. So when we look at propose, we've got effectively our proposal or PO approved. Who's approving it? That's probably a flow as part of the getting out of this stage, right? We look at plan. So we're developing a baseline schedule. We're developing our baseline budget. We're putting a proposed resource plan together on how we're going to deliver this project. All of these need individual approvals, as well as probably the gate approval of either the sponsor, the program manager, or portfolio manager, signing that off to move to the next stage. When we look at execute, this is where we're actually delivering the project. We're tracking the progress. We're collaborating through teams, through Sensei IQ. We've got our process updates. We've got our status updates. We're taking corrective action. We saw the risks earlier. That's part of this execute phase if they hadn't been identified earlier. Maybe this is where issues are being raised because we're actually recognizing those risks at this point. So all of this happens during the execute phase. And then once we've completed that, that's when we move into the closing phase. And that's where we're closing off the project. Maybe this is where the PMO gets involved to actually officially close that off. We're looking at doing our lessons learned at this stage, and hopefully a post-implementation review. So all of these can be checklists within here that are mandatory in order to close this project. We'll keep going. Thanks, Bree. So just around sort of item governance. So AE demonstrated the risk one earlier, which was awesome. So if we kind of look at different item governance that we kind of typically see, so things like change requests or variations or whatever kind of word you'd like to use that's the same sort of flavor. We can look around, is there an approval process on that? How does that work? Is there a dollar value that actually impacts who would be approving that? If it's above a value, does it need first level approval, then second level approval? Is there an approval matrix sitting behind that? Are they multiple approvals? Are they linear, parallel? Can they all go at once? Are we relying on one being approved to go to the next? All of these things are things you need to consider, and these can be on individual item workflows. So the risk, as demonstrated earlier, we have a risk score that determines if it needs approval, and whether an issue gets created. So these things are things you can think of. We can do that branching logic in business process flows, and within the flow, we can actually then take the outcome of an approval or some other factor within that, and then influence other things in the system or direct things to happen. So, you know, if we can define the process, we understand what our boundaries are and what we're doing with those. Another good one is the project status update component. So, you know, the project manager will go in, they'll actually set up all their KPIs, add all their documentation, add all their comments, and then submit that status update for approval by the project sponsor, who would then go through, review that project status update, approve or reject it, add their own comments, and then that would probably then flow through to the actual reporting. So when we look at the portfolio level reporting and the project level reporting, we do have the status update component in there. So yeah, that would take that. Perfect. Keep going.
Wonderful. All right, so we're now moving into the question and answers. So we do have a few pre-submitted questions that we will run through first. I do encourage, if anyone has any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat or raise your hand if you have any that you would like to run through. All righty, so we'll start with the first one. How will the automated system accommodate changing requirements? I'll throw to one of my colleagues to answer that one.
Thanks, Bree. I'll pick that one up. This circles back on Simon Phillips' earlier question around maintainability. So to cover this pre-submitted question first, with changing requirements, so say if a business process flow or Power Automate workflow needed to be updated, say, you know, for a particular stage, for example, if the steps needed to change, it's very easy compared to the previous solutions where you needed specialist skills to be able to do this. As demonstrated, you can access the business process flow, assuming you have access to edit it, and then make those changes. It's very simple to do it in a browser. To pivot to the point around maintainability, so it depends on how, it's up to you. You can choose to make it fairly simple, you can make it complex. So focusing on the simple side of things, to maintain, say, let's look at a Power Automate workflow. A common scenario we see is that people may change roles and they may need to transfer the ownership of that flow to maintain or to ensure maintainability of it. So that can be done by adding a Microsoft 365 group to it. And then you can look at another perspective where you can easily export it to say a source control, if that's how you chose to do it, or you can even go to the other end of the scale and get more formal using application lifecycle management tools. And yeah, the point is it's flexible and it's up to you.
Perfect, thank you, Steve. Is a business process flow a software solution? I'll pass that to Felipe.
So short answer, no. So Microsoft Cloud Solutions is a solution. Sensei IQ is a solution, but the business process flow is just a part of the architecture of the solution. It's not a solution per se.
Perfect, thank you. All right, next question. Is there any need for agile governance? If so, what would this look like leveraging a business process flow? I will pass this one to Zsuzsa.
Thank you, Bree. So this really comes down to your process at your organization. So how do you manage agile projects? How, and this really ties very nicely with what Kurt was saying before, which is the what, how, and you know, those questions that you really need to sit down before you start building one of these flows and plan out your governance process and what the agile governance really looks like in your organization. And then it also ties a little bit with what I've said in the beginning, which is a lot of the questions that we ask now for, is this possible in business process flows? A lot of the answers are now yes, we can build this in, but it really will come down to your own process and how complex it is and how you manage agile projects. So I think the answer to this one is definitely a yes. But again, map it out, talk about it, discuss what the process looks like, and then we'll help you with the how. because really today we have the ability to build your process into business process flows. And again, I think that the key always with these things is start simple. You don't want to introduce too much complexity in your processes in the beginning, especially if this is something very new for your organization. If it's simple, and that goes back to that no code, low code solution as well, your PMO can build it, you know, from scratch very easily. But once you start complicating things and the process becomes complex, once you start even integrating with other systems, if that's the case, you will then go into an area where you probably will need more maintenance and more help with your IT as well, and for more specialist people. So always start simple, and yeah, I think take it from there.
Perfect. Thank you, Shuja. All right, the next question. Is there any possibility to extract details through a flow directly from Microsoft Project? I will throw that one to AE.
Thanks for the question. Just to, I guess, to paraphrase the question, if we're talking about Microsoft Project Online, we have there are plenty of triggers from Microsoft in Power Automate to allow you to extract that information. The depth of that information depends on what you're trying to do with it. If we're pulling just regular fields, this can be pretty easily done via REST API calls. If we're looking at trying to grab lookup tables, we're trying to link all of the data that happens in Project Online, this can get a bit difficult, but there are a lot of tools to help you do that. In terms of moving information from Microsoft Project, we provide a data sync tool from Project Online and for DevOps and some other external execution tools to allow you to bring that information and link it to your source data. Maybe your source data lives in Project Online and you're using Sensei IQ to help uplift that system and that ease of maintenance and reliability in terms of, say, you want to raise risks and issues. It's a bit easier to navigate and to use it to its fullest potential. But we can flow directly from Microsoft Project Online.
Thanks, AE. All right, last pre-submitted question. What is a recommended way to deal with the reality of changing and evolving governance processes? And I'll pass that one to Kurt.
Thanks, Bree. Look, the first thing would be never change, because we want to stay exactly as we are and we never want to evolve. No, I'm sorry. So look, what we need to do, so we need to consider the impact. So obviously, what's the impact of the current process, and then what's the impact to future processes and reporting and insights and the people that consume the information. So adding fields, updating, adding an additional approval, those sort of things we can do. There's no issues with that sort of thing if that's what it is. So it's all about understanding, you know, what are we wanting to achieve out of this and why are we doing it? So, you know, one of the things I'd say to suggest would be, if there is significant change to a current process, maybe the better answer is that we look at actually creating a new project type with its own governance workflow, and then that's separated, so we can then define that in reporting and use that as filters to understand what's going on. So yeah, the best thing to do is just consider what's going on, consider the impacts. If you've got your process well defined in the first place, it should be very easy to kind of build that out and evolve with that as you go.
Perfect. Thank you, Kurt. We do have a few questions in the chat, so I'll just run through this and I'll get someone to pick this one up. If an approval is stuck with a user who is absent, left the business, can the flow be recalled, redirected to another user? Also without affecting others pending approvals in the same flow. I'll pass that one to AE.
Yep. As the administrator of the Power Automate flow, you'll be able to redirect those approvals while in flight. Most of the time, for I guess bigger clients where we don't have just one approver, we may have a first to respond. So it might be a user group in Office 365 that's syncing with your AAD groups, but you are able to redirect an approval that's been sent to a specific person. All you have to do is enable the ability to, there's an enable switch on an approval that allows you to redirect it to someone else or reassign the approval if required.
Perfect. Thank you, AE. We do have a few more minutes left. Was there any other questions that anyone would like us to run through as part of this session?
I think Simon's thinking and thoughts there are also valuable in terms of human interaction. and that we shouldn't replace talking to each other by automating almost everything. I think that's a very valid thought. I don't know if you guys have read the comments.
Yeah, I've had a quick look at that, and it's thought-provoking, right?
Yeah.
Where you want to have a step where you can check off that you've had that human interaction.
Yeah, most definitely. We do
Definitely.
have, oh, I can see you've just answered the question that's come in, AE. Is there any more to unpick there?
I guess that question's a very good question. It's just a bit more information about how you're looking to do that. So if you have information that you want in an approval flow, we can get all of that information. We're able to connect that information via Fetch XML to get an SSRS report, so that you can have your business case being filled out through the application, and then sort of a report that can be exported based on those fields that have been populated. So it might be, say in the risk, it might be our risk plan is actually just our risk mitigation strategy, what we've put the likelihood of and the consequences as, and maybe the impacts to the business. And maybe we want that in a report for, as Kurt said, for users outside of the system. So it might be our executives don't actually have licenses for Power Apps, and we just need them to get the actual document.
Perfect. We do have a question that's come in from John. Is it essential that Outlook Exchange 365 is used, or can the old Exchange systems work with the data flow?
Oh, sorry, I just answered that one in line. So with flows, if Office 365 Outlook is not available, we can definitely use things like SMTP to send the mail. It'll still get received as normal in your Exchange system. So yeah, it's just the ability to send that we need to change.
Perfect. Thank you, Kurt. We'll do a last call for any questions.
Just on Michelle's comment on the document, or like a form that pulls information together when the flow runs. I don't know if you've seen that one. I feel like that there's another Ask an Expert or some sort of other forum that would be discussed of how you can implement this sort of thing into your workflow. So that's probably something to note.
In terms of the form, so I guess for us the form would be what you're I guess putting into the Power App, and that's the information we're pulling in and then submitting for approval. In terms of if you wanted that to be a dynamic, where as soon as the information goes in there and we've saved the risk, say it sends off by itself without a button, we can apply some, I guess, some more complex automation via either JavaScript or some higher end business rules to sort of make that happen a bit more dynamically.
Perfect. Thank you, AE. Alrighty, we'll move on. So keep on the lookout for this webinar and recording and follow-up content that will be released to you shortly. If you're unable to attend, obviously the live will be distributed, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us and we can answer any of those if you're unable to make it. Also, keep an eye out for future events and webinars. You can also access a lot of our content on demand through our website. And please don't forget to connect with us on LinkedIn to stay up to date with the latest PPM insights and ensure you don't miss any of our future events. We're also super eager to hear if there's any topics that you would like to hear Sensei present on, and also if you have any feedback about today's session and the format, please feel free to provide that to us also. I would like to personally thank everyone that was joining us for today. I hope this has been insightful for you all. Again, if you have any questions, please do feel free to reach out to us, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
guys.
Yeah.
See you later.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Great session.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks so much.